justifying yourself, qualifying yourself, explaining yourself. There's a great line from the movie Moneyball that I just love. It's like the Brad Pitt character, the Jonah Hill character points to it and says, it's a problem you think you need to explain yourself to people. Don't do that, ever, right? That is advice to live by. Like, don't feel the need to explain yourself to people, especially not if you're not directly asked. Like, if someone asks you a direct question, you can answer the direct question. But if somebody says something, you're like, maybe they think something negative about me from it. Should I explain myself? No. No, you should not. So some of the core principles when it comes to attraction. First thing I want to emphasize to you is that everything related to the science of attraction, understanding attraction, if you want to go back to first principles, like the equivalent to what in math would be counting, the very basics, it all goes back to the evolutionary environments, right? So anything that's true in attraction, you don't always have to think that far back. And you certainly, once you've come up with an idea or something that works, you don't have to like take it all back to first principles every time. But the first principles with attraction are, we evolved in a certain environment that is not the modern day. And what was attractive in that environment is what is attractive, not what should be attractive in the modern day. So you always want to keep that in mind when thinking about attraction. I'm sure I'm going to come back to that point over and over and over again. Next thing to understand when it comes to attraction is that almost everything you do when dealing with a woman and attraction, it has trade-offs. So a lot of things are attractive in one way and unattractive in another way. So for example, if you tell a girl about your amazing job and your amazing lifestyle, that is attractive, except for the fact that you told her about it is unattractive, right? Caring that she know that is unattractive. Her finding out about it is attractive. So what you want to do is you want to figure out how to make the attractive things come across in the most natural ways possible. Next thing with regards to principles of attraction that I want you guys to know going in, frame makes all the difference. If you do the same thing through different frames, it can be completely different. So there's this principle in game of like, don't buy a girl a drink, that's supplicating, that's bending over backwards for her. And that's true if she goes, buy me a drink, and you go, oh yes, princess. On the other hand, if you're like talking to her and you jokingly go, yeah, I think I need to be more drunk to talk to you, come on, let's get a drink, right? That's a completely different frame, whatever. Or if you're like, hey, I'm partying, so come on, you're partying with me now, let's go get a shot. That's a very different frame. So the frame around the action matters as much or more than the action. First of all, with flirtation, it's very important to know that flirtation is an attitude first and foremost and a technique second. So with flirtation, if you have the right attitude but say the wrong words, they'll usually get that it's a flirtation. And a great example of this is what a lot of naturals do, and a lot of my students, when I've taught them the idea of flirtation, but we haven't gotten to the part where I teach the technique yet on a boot camp, they'll do what we call question teases. They'll do teases that are essentially just asking questions. She'll say she's a philosophy major, like, oh, so you want to, be really deep and profound and pour your entire life. It's a teasing idea in the format of a question, which is way less strong than if it were an actual tease, but the soul is there. The idea of the tease is there. The idea that you're being playful and giving her a hard time is there, which is enough to still make it pretty good. It's not as good as it could be, but it's pretty good. So attitude and delivery matter more than words. And then on the other hand, you have guys that do the opposite, which is they'll say something flirty in a very deadpan way, right? Like there's an old school classic tease where you're talking to two girls, you're like, you know what, I think you're the good girl, you're responsible, whatever, whereas you're definitely the bad girl, right? Something like that, that's a pretty decent tease. But if you said that in a very logical way, like, you are the good girl, you are the bad girl, and you're just completely serious about it, and like it's like a logical assessment, it doesn't work. It's lost the soul of teasing. So flirting and teasing, the soul matters more than the words. And so a lot of guys, if you're repeating lines that you've seen me use, but you're repeating them without it actually having the vibe, the attitude, the energy, the tonality, the intention of a tease behind it, it's not going to work. In fact, it's going to be weird. So you have to have the idea behind it more than the actual techniques. Second thing, most things can be rephrased to be more flirty. A lot of guys have trouble flirting. First of all, they have trouble teasing in general, but they also have trouble taking a tease to a flirt. And by the way, what I mean by that, a tease is when you're giving a girl a hard time. A flirt is when you're giving a girl a hard time in a man-to-woman way, in a way that relates to a relationship. So, but anytime you tease a girl, you can make that tease man-to-woman almost like risk-free by just adding the man-to-woman afterwards. So let's say a girl is studying something very nerdy and you go, oh my God, you're such a nerd. That's a tease. Not maybe the best tease in the world, but it's a tease. But if you said, oh my God, you're such a nerd, this is why we're not going to get along. Or, oh my God, you're such a nerd. Yeah, I can only have one nerd in a relationship. This isn't going to work between us. The fact that you added that relationship component is a freebie. You just got a free way to turn it from a tease into a flirt. And so for all of you who are not making it man to woman, for all of you guys who end up in a fun friend zone with girls over and over again, this is a great way to flip that switch from friendly tease to man to woman flirt and to actually make it sexual. With respect to attraction, because attraction and flirting are closely intertwined, kind of science of attraction, first thing you have to realize with attraction is that all of the theory of attraction, it makes sense from a fundamental evolutionary standpoint. Any theory you have of attraction, any idea you have of attraction, you should be able, if you're really being rigorous, to be able to take it all the way back to the evolutionary environment and explain why would this have been attractive, why would this have been a valuable trait for a man in a tribe of 50 people in a harsh environment trying to survive. Because everything that is attractive makes sense, like everything that's emotionally attractive to women makes sense in that context. A lot of things that are attractive to women don't make sense in the modern context. So if you're ever looking at like, why does this girl like that guy? He's such a loser. Well, in the modern era, in the modern day, he's such a loser. But what would his behaviors, what would what she's seeing from him be the equivalent to in the evolutionary environment? What would it mean there? And almost always you can be, oh, it makes sense, right? And so things like, there's been a lot of questions on here about like looks, money, status, stuff like that. Things like that are logical constructs that don't make sense in the evolutionary environment, right? In the evolutionary environment, money hadn't been invented yet. It was a barter system, right? Cars didn't exist yet. The equivalent of looks was like you haven't been deformed by disease and had your like face ripped off by a saber-toothed tiger. That was the equivalent of like looks in the evolutionary environment. These things didn't really even exist in the same way. But one thing that absolutely existed in the evolutionary environment is social proof. Having other people respond well to you was life and death in that environment. And that's why women respond incredibly well to social proof. A woman who barely likes you and then she sees some other woman responding well to you suddenly is in love with you. It's crazy. Or a woman who's kind of lukewarm on you and then she sees you give an order to someone and they immediately follow it without question and like seeming to like you while doing it, suddenly becomes massively attracted to you. Just consider the evolutionary environment when you're considering the theory of attraction. And again, once you have principles that work, you don't have to think back to first principles and think back to the evolutionary environment every single time. But whenever you're confused about attraction, where you don't understand something about attraction, try and go back to that evolutionary environment for your understanding. Second thing to realize in attraction, and this has come up over and over again in this discussion as well, many things with respect to attraction have trade-offs. Okay, so a lot of things are simultaneously attractive and unattractive. If you drive a nice car and you can't wait to tell the girl about it, the nice car is attractive. Telling her about it and being qualifying yourself and caring too much about her reaction is incredibly unattractive. And probably on net, cluster of behaviors is more unattractive than attractive. And that's what you're thinking about, right? You're not thinking about like never doing anything unattractive or never like slipping your frame ever. You're just thinking like if over and over again throughout the interaction, the cluster of behaviors you're exhibiting is net attractive, net high value, you're gonna win overall, right? A game is not about never making a mistake or never slipping your frame. It's about doing so many things well that the small mistakes don't really matter. But they are trade-offs, right? And there is a time and a place where qualifying yourself may actually be okay because the gain you're getting from it is enough. And there's a lot of places where it's not. Just as an aside to this, trade-offs exist not just within attraction, but in other areas. So there may be a time when you are going to say something that is net unattractive, but net positive for comfort, which could be good. So say you've been hanging out with a girl all night, you've been making out with her, she clearly likes you, there's tons of arousal, but she doesn't know you, you're a stranger. Doing some things to make it seem like the next place you're taking her to is completely safe and not a big commitment, even if you come off as a little bit like you care a little too much about how she thinks in that moment, it may be worth it because the comfort you're building in that moment matters more than the value you're losing. So game is trade-offs, both trade-offs with value and non-value, but also trade-offs of comfort and non-value, value and non-comfort, etc. So again, everything you do is a trade-off. Just keep in mind that you want to be making good trades, not bad trades overall. So how to create sexualization right from the get-go? Well, first thing is this. You are dictating the type of interaction you want to have. If you don't make a move towards making it sexual, if you don't make a move towards making it man to woman, it will not become that because women are not at liberty to make those moves usually without appearing slutty, and they don't know they have that kind of permission. If you start off with a girl and you start talking about the weather and your hobbies and what are you doing this weekend and that kind of stuff, that's not going to go in a man to woman sexual direction. If you start off though with saying things like, can't tell if I love you or hate you, I don't know if you and I are gonna get along. If you call girls things like adorable and feisty, as opposed to just treating them like the same way you would treat a man, that's one of the first things you can do to sexualize. And I actually do an exercise with my students on boot camp oftentimes. It's gonna sound weird done between two guys, but it's a very useful exercise which is to them, I say, you play the role of girl, I'll play the role of man, and I'm going to try to make it man to woman and sexual. You try and make it platonic. And the fact of the matter is it's literally impossible to keep a conversation platonic if the other person involved is trying to make it man to woman. The person who decides to make it man to woman decides that, right? The other person cannot decide. They can decide to walk away, they can decide not to engage, they can decide to reject you, but they can't decide to keep it platonic, right? And so if you've made that decision, you will have a man to woman communication. Now, the second problem a lot of guys have, though, and this goes to attraction, is that the way they make it man to woman is by complimenting, right? If the way you make it man to woman is just compliment, well, you're actually losing attraction, because each time you do that, you're making it man to woman, but you're putting the girl on a pedestal, right? What you need to learn to do is to make it man to woman in the way where you're saying this is going to be a man to woman interaction if I like you, without also saying I like you and you have me, right? Which is why if you take, for example, you and I would not get along versus I love you, both of them are saying there's a potential relationship between us, but one is putting on a pedestal, the other one is doing the opposite. So that's a fundamental factor. How important is game versus looks, money, and status? This is a really interesting question because all of these things do matter. Absolutely, they do matter. I think that in a very real sense today, this question comes up a lot. Right? I think a lot of guys have it in their head that like, if I just get good looking enough, and if I just get enough money, and if I just get enough social status, that the women will come to me. At the limit, this is true. Like, if you became an international superstar, wealthy, well-known, famous, that is absolutely true. Cristiano Ronaldo would not need a whole lot of game to do very well. He probably actually has game, I would guess. Most likely he has game because he's done so well with women for so long that like he just kind of grew into it. But he wouldn't really need to if you were as famous and rich and good looking as he is. So at the limit, it's absolutely true that enough of these things mean that you need very, very little game, at least to attract a girl at first. That said, I've seen a lot of guys that have these things going on, like genuinely rich, attractive people. They get into relationships and then they end up in the relationship getting exploited by the women, or they end up, bending over backwards or getting browbeaten by the women, or that kind of stuff, because they don't know how to hold their frame and that kind of stuff. And then the only option they have is to leave the relationship, go find another one, and then they end up in another toxic, bad relationship because they don't know how to be high value within the relationship, right? So they're high value up until the time the girl actually meets them, and then low value in the relationship, and they have this churn of women. So that actually can be a problem even with a looks, money, status. But the main problem with the looks, money, status thing is that it's incredibly hard to be so good looking, so much money, so status, that you don't need some amount of game. Yeah, I've had lots of wealthy clients, I've had lots of very good looking clients, and they all have their complaints, whether it is they can only attract girls up to a certain looks level, or where it is they get the initial attraction from girls, but then afterwards, it doesn't really work out for them, those kind of things. So regardless, you basically do need the game at some point. And it's really kind of insidious, this advice that's given about get more money, get more status, get more looks, because the problem is you can always use that as an excuse not to learn game, because learning game is hard, right? Going out and facing rejections, realizing this is something you have to work on, putting yourself out there, following up on numbers that are likely going to flake on you. It's not pleasant. And so what a lot of guys will do is they'll just refer back to, I'm just not rich enough yet. Let me go get richer and then it'll solve itself. I'm just not good, I'm pretty jacked, but if I get really jacked, take some steroids, whatever, then I'll get over the top. And it's a never-ending treadmill where you can keep getting better and better and better, and then you can always say, once I get to that better level, I'll get the results. And that's what a lot of guys do. And then they never get the results, And then finally, I get guys on my programs who they're like, I worked on myself for 10 years, but they just thought the women would come. And then I got to literally hit my goals in every single area of life, and I still had no women, so here I am. And then within a weekend, we get them women. Those things do matter, though. I'm not going to say they don't. Like people say looks don't matter. Looks do matter. They help a lot. Money matters if used right. Status matters in a huge way, especially in the social media era. But if you have those things without at least some game to go with them, you're still going to be in bad shape. Next question. What are some other ways to build attraction other than teasing? Is teasing the most effective way to build attraction outside of looks, money, and status? Everybody keeps coming back to looks, money, and status. Teasing is really interesting. And the question with teasing that you need to understand is, why does teasing build attraction? And there are two reasons why teasing builds attraction. The first reason why teasing builds attraction is because teasing is breaking rapport. Most guys, when they're attracted to a woman, they kiss her ass and give her gifts and tell her how pretty she is and try and be similar to her. This is what you do with people that you perceive of as higher value than you. With people you perceive of as your equivalent level of value or lower value than you break rapport. You give them a hard time, you stand up for yourself. When they do something you don't like, you're willing to tell them, you're willing to have boundaries, those kind of things, right? And so teasing is breaking rapport in a little bit, or at least indicating you're willing to break rapport. You're doing it in a playful way, so it's not super harsh, but the fact that you are actually willing to break rapport says so much for your value. It automatically puts you apart from almost every other guy. That's the first thing. Second thing that teasing does is it provides an emotional journey for the girl. It makes it relevant for the girl. It gives her something to win over, right? It gives her a reason to chase you. It gives her a reason to react to you. It also shows, by the way, in the same way of breaking rapport, you're not susceptible to the social pressure, that you're comfortable in this tense environment. You're comfortable in a man-to-woman environment. You've been there before, those kind of things. The fact that you can be playful in that environment. Because one of the hardest things for someone to do when they're under stress is to be playful. Those are the reasons why flirting works. The other reason that flirting works, by the way, is it gives you a way to offer to make it man to woman without giving compliments, right? So these are all the reasons why flirtation builds value potentially if it's done well. There are lots of ways that the flirtation or teasing can actually not build value, right? So if your teasing comes off as forced or try hard, it actually doesn't build value, for example. Or if your teasing comes off as incongruent, it doesn't build value. It only builds value when done right. The other thing too with teasing, and a lot of guys fall into this, is that when you start to learn to tease, you start to get good reactions. You tease and the girl giggles. You tease and the girl likes it. You tease and the girl reacts. And so you keep teasing and teasing and teasing. But teasing is only one phase of the interaction. If you just stick in teasing and you don't go to the later phase of the interaction, you don't go to actually getting the girl to qualify herself to you, to prove to you why she's worthy of you to try and win you over, then you're not going to get anywhere. Think of it this way. Teasing gives her that impulse, that desire to win you over, that desire to impress you. But if you don't then go ahead and go through the process of letting her impress you and be won over by her and let her feel like she's earned you, then the teasing will be for nothing. So teasing is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. And in fact, if a girl liked you already enough from the start, you could just skip the teasing and just go right into qualifying her. Right? You could go right into kind of almost interviewing her for the role of your girlfriend in a way. So teasing is good as far as it goes, but it's not the only one. What are some other ways to build attraction other than teasing? There are a ton. Good storytelling builds attraction because you have focus on you, you have attention, you're conveying your best qualities, those kind of things. Being non-reactive builds attraction. Being opinionated and leading builds attraction. Social proof, meaning having other people reacting well to you, especially women reacting well to you, helps a lot, builds attraction. Right? These things all are catalysts for attraction. And they're all for the same reasons, right? They're all conveying the same things in a way that teasing would, which is that you've had high status in your life, that you are able to handle yourself in social situations, that people like you in general. They convey these same qualities in different ways than teasing would, but it comes down to a lot of the same attraction triggers for those versus from teasing. Question, how much attraction can be built during the part of the set where you're still in conversation with the group? A lot, an absolute lot. And in fact, with the hottest girls, you may actually be better off conveying attraction in a group setting than in a one-on-one setting. And the reason for this is a couple reasons. Number one, when you approach a really hot girl who kind of has maybe her shields up or she's used to being approached or at a glance doesn't see you as on her level, well, you have to get her attracted to you right away to even get her to talk to you. But if you're talking to her with 3 or 4 friends, if her friends like you, even if she doesn't, she's kind of stuck with you, right? And that gives you a platform to build value, build attraction. And now she is kind of forced to see your attractive qualities. She's forced to interact with you long enough for you to provide your value. There's a great quote I love in game. It's I think it's Voltaire. He said, give me 5 minutes to talk away my ugliness and I will bed the Queen of France. That's the way I think about it with a lot of these like high status girls that might reject on the opener. If I can get in a conversation with them for 5 minutes where I actually have their attention and they see how high value I am, I can do miracles. But getting that initial interaction even started sometimes can be hard. So a group setting actually gives you that. The other thing that a group setting gives you is that if her friends like you, that's social proof, which is one of the most powerful attraction triggers ever. And in a group setting, you are able to, by being nice to the group, engaging with the group, and then giving a hard time to the girl you're most interested in, you are able to create that initial drama and that initial frame of man to woman in a very, very oblique way. And almost like you didn't even choose to talk to that girl, almost like you don't even want to be talking to her while you're building this drama. Whereas if you approach a girl one-on-one, it's very hard to, ignore the fact that you approach and ignore the fact that you obviously want this interaction. So there is some little amount of try-hardness about a one-on-one approach that doesn't occur in a group approach. So actually a group setting is better than a one-on-one setting for attraction. What it's not good for is escalation, right? Because you really can't make out with a girl in front of her group most times. And you really can't get super intimate in the conversation in front of her group in most cases. But this actually highlights a huge misconception, which is that attraction and escalation are not the same thing. Escalating on a girl does not build attraction. Escalating on a girl is a way of capitalizing on attraction. When you have attracted her, you can escalate. And if she is receptive to your escalation and escalates back on you, that creates more emotion, more positive emotion in the interaction, which is good, but it's still not value and attraction. It's a different thing, okay? The compliance around the escalation builds attraction, but that's not even down to the escalation. If she complied to something else, it would build the same amount of attraction. It's kind of technical, but it is very important to realize that escalation doesn't build attraction, right? Getting physical with a girl does not attract her to you. It might arouse her, it might turn her on, it might escalate things, but it doesn't build attraction. Now, her compliance and participation in the escalation to some extent does, but the escalation itself does not. And again, that same attraction could be built through her complying to other things. If she complied to moving to another venue with you, that would be, it would build that same level of attraction compliance that the escalation would. What are the top attraction-related mistakes that stop you from getting high value or hot women? There are a lot. Like, I literally don't even know where to start with this. Okay, well, I'm just going to start listing off some of these, but there are a lot. Attraction-related mistakes that stop you. Number one, just giving compliments. Giving compliments, being direct, escalating. This will stop you from getting women in general. It would especially stop you from getting the hottest women because there's no sexual tension. There's no doubt in their mind whether they can have you because you're putting them on a pedestal. That's number one. Number two would be gimmicky or leveling behaviors. Things that are out of character that you're doing to get an outcome. And this is an interesting one because there's a lot of things you can do in game that will get you from point A to point B and then will fuck you up when it comes to getting to point Z. For example, let's say that at the start of the interaction, in order to get a girl to talk to you, you tell a self-deprecating joke. And that self-deprecating joke is funny and makes her think, oh, this guy's kind of fun to talk to, and also puts her guard down because you're being kind of self-effacing and whatnot. And so it actually gets her to participate in the conversation with you. And if that was the only way to get her to participate in the conversation, otherwise she'd leave, it might actually be good. But that self-deprecating joke, while it did get her attention a little bit, and while it did get a smile and maybe a laugh from her, it also told her something about how you view yourself and how she should view you and how the frame between the two of you would be. And it might put you inherently in the friend zone or in the, look, I am flattered, but I'm not interested zone, those types of things, right? And so there's a lot of things you can do that get you through one phase in game, but mess you up in a later phase in game. In general, guys ask about being self-deprecating. I think it's almost never good to be self-deprecating in a serious manner. Sometimes it's okay jokingly. Like sometimes you can self-deprecate. Like I will self-deprecate by saying I'm very unintelligent when I've already in the interaction been like very clever, very witty, and the girl thinks I'm really, really smart. So by self-deprecating about being unintelligent, I'm actually doing it sarcastically to point out the opposite. That's not self-deprecation. That's not serious self-deprecation. But actually doing it in a serious way, if you actually are insecure about something and you tell the girl you're insecure about it and you seem insecure about it, is generally very, very bad. That's a huge mistake. There's a lot of failing shit tests would be an attraction-related mistake, like being too reactive, or as soon as a girl gives you shit, you get all very insecure or very shy or very defensive about it. Qualifying yourself, trying too hard to explain yourself, or doing things that clearly make it look like you're trying to appear better than you are or trying to impress. Women see right through that. That tends to be very, very bad. But typically, justifying yourself, qualifying yourself, explaining yourself. There's a great line from the movie Moneyball that I just love. It's like the Brad Pitt character, the Jonah Hill character points to it and says, it's a problem you think you need to explain yourself to people. Don't do that, ever, right? That is advice to live by. Like, don't feel the need to explain yourself to people, especially not if you're not directly asked. Like, if someone asks you a direct question, you can answer the direct question. But if somebody says something, you're like, maybe they think something negative about me from it. Should I explain myself? No. No, you should not. You don't need to. If they really care, they'll explicitly ask, and you trying to explain it only makes it seem more true. It makes it seem like it's something you're insecure about or something you care about. So that's another huge one. There probably are a bunch more. Those are the ones I can think about off the top of my head for right now. Is it possible that some women don't respond well to teasing? What to do in those cases? I'm going to say no, but I'm going to say a qualified no. Because there are definitely women that don't respond well to certain teases, and there are definitely women that don't respond well to a lot of teasing, and there are certainly women for whom teasing is less useful than with others. That is all true. But to say that there's women for whom teasing doesn't work at all, I disagree with. And I want to give kind of an example, kind of a cultural example, which is compare a hot blonde, we'll say party girl, not to like label girls whatever too much, but hot blonde party girl in the United States versus shy Asian girl in Asia versus hot blonde party girl in the United States. If you were to give the same tease, like a tease of the same severity and a same amount of like polarization, like rudeness, so to speak, to both of them, you would probably get a much more extreme reaction. It would be a lot more overwhelming to the shy Asian girl in Asia because of shyness and because of like culture and because those kind of things are not said in that part of the world in the same way. That could be very miscalibrated. And she might react very negatively to that thing that the hot blonde party girl might respond very well to. By the same token, there might be a tease that you could say to the shy Asian girl in Asia that would get a good reaction from her, that if you said that's the hot blonde party girl, it wouldn't even hit her radar. Like she wouldn't even realize that it was polarizing in any way because it's so soft by comparison. The tools needed to get the same emotional response from those two girls are very different. But the emotional journey you're going to have with those girls from meeting them to developing a relationship with them is actually quite similar because they are genetically similar. They evolved genetically similar over, millions and millions of years as animals and hundreds of thousands of years as humans. They have that same emotional journey of finding a guy attractive and interesting in him, catching their attention, and then winning him over and then being accepted by him. That same journey is going to exist in both cases, but what's needed, the amount, like in one case you need a sledgehammer, in the other case you need like a little tiny like, whatever the tiniest hammer you can imagine is. So there's a difference in degree and a difference in the tools to get the same outcome, but the outcome is the same. The journey is still the same. There are girls that won't respond well to a big tease or girls that won't respond well to a small tease. But I don't think there's any girl that doesn't respond well to teasing. I'll give you a third example, which is there's sort of a Central European, Eastern European sort of girl blueprint where I don't do a lot of one-liner or clever type teases. I'm more teased through frame. I tease through telling good stories and conveying myself as an attractive guy. Conveying not through a one-liner of like you and I would not get along, but more conveying through my dismissiveness and my life story that I don't need them. But it's still the same emotional journey. It's still the same idea of I'm this kind of person, you're this kind of person, that's being conveyed. But again, it's through different tools. The journey doesn't change, the tools do. But I still think teasing and evaluation, they're all part of the journey, almost no matter what. It's just done in a different way with different women. The next question, because I kind of was long on that one. Should I tease her or say something push-pull at the date? I'm always fucked up at dates and kind of boring. So dates are really interesting. And the answer to this question, like the answer to almost every question in game, is it depends. In general, if you've gotten to a date, the girl already likes you a little bit. Usually, by the time you're at the date, some amount of value exists because she's already decided that she's taken hours out of her life and said, you're the most important, interesting thing she can do with this night, right? So there's a level of value already there. So you don't have to do as much in terms of building that value. And you can sort of assume some value and capitalize on it, right? So if you know my overall model of game, open, premise, evaluate, narrative, close, right? So you have the open, starting the conversation, already obviously has been done before the date. Premise, making it man to woman. If you're on a date that's man to woman, that's already been done before the date also, right? The next would be evaluation, which is you finding out if she's the type of girl you like and letting her win you over. That's the process you're mainly doing on a date. You're mainly assuming she likes you because she showed up on the date, and you are letting her win you over. And you're going to sometimes like what she says and be won over. Sometimes you'll give her a hard time about it, but on net, you're liking more than you're disliking, you're letting her win you over. So that's how dates should normally go. Sometimes, though, you'll show up on the date and the girl is not in the best mood. Or you'll show up on the date and the girl is kind of giving you shit tests. Or you'll show up on the date and the girl is kind of like iffy on it. Or maybe some girls have a personality where they just like to be a bit feisty. In which case, for that particular girl, you still need to do the same types of things that you would have to do had you just met a girl cold and you're not on the date, which means more teasing, more flirting, more pushing the girl away, more of these overt displays of value, etc. So on many dates, you don't need nearly as much of that, but on some dates you do. And you have to just ask yourself, what date am I on right now? How is this girl actually acting around me, right? The fact that she is on a date with you is a big clue. But the bigger clue is, how is she acting? So you should be paying attention to the girl in front of you and paying attention to the reactions you're getting and the actions she's doing, more so than the fact you're on a date. But you can walk into the date with certain preconceptions of how it's likely to go. What are the ways we give girls permission to be sexual or flirt? What are ways we discourage them by mistake or unknowingly? If you seem judgmental about sex, if you seem shy about sex, unwilling to even talk about sex, for example, that's not going to help. Also, really don't want to give a girl a hard time about being friendly or sexual or whatever. I'll give you a good example, which is I had someone who used to coach for me years and years ago. He was good overall. I mean, he's a pretty good coach overall and did a lot of good for a lot of guys. But there was this one thing that he taught guys that I totally hated, and I told him stop teaching guys this. He would, after his opener on a cold approach, he would say to girls, "Are you always this friendly to guys?" Which I fucking hate that line. The thing about that line is, it could work really well occasionally. You say, "Are you always this friendly to guys?" She goes, "No, I'm not," and then she's kind of admitting she likes you. And so sometimes it could go really, really well. But when you say the line, "Are you always as friendly to guys?" there's an inherent level of sort of judgment there, right? In a way, you're saying like, "Are you a slut?" Right? You're not literally exactly saying that, but you're kind of saying that. "Are you always this slutty?" And you're also kind of saying something about yourself, which is you're saying that you're not used to getting such good reactions from girls. Those two things are two very negative frames. So again, this line can work. And actually for beginner students, it worked a lot better than whatever else they were doing, because when they did get a good reaction and they were able to point out that it was a good reaction and get the girl to agree to it, that was a positive for them. But at an intermediate level or above, I think it's a really terrible line, because it's setting those really negative judgmental frames about the girl and sex. And it's also setting these frames about your expectation when you talk to a girl that I think really are harmful to the overall frame and conveyance you want to have of yourself. So that's a good example of a line that I think is really, really horrible. If you seem really nervous, or you're dancing around the topic of sex, you're unwilling to say certain words, and you seem nervous around them, if you're nervous about sex, she's going to be nervous about sex with you, because she's going to think it's a big deal to you. She's going to think you're uncomfortable with it. So that's another really big one. And then also, like, your stories. I would not tell a story about, some girl who you didn't like because she was too slutty, right? If you want the girl to be sexually open, don't tell that story, or variations and versions of that. So those are the types of things you want to generally avoid. It is actually interesting. Sometimes I've been reading the book Making People Talk. Do you have any of the books that will help with attraction and flirting? That book doesn't even help with attraction and flirting so much. It just helps with conversation, which is a skill that most guys are terrible at. For attraction and flirting, weirdly, one of the things I'll recommend to you, even though it's indirect, would be read a book on evolutionary psychology. Read The Moral Animal or The Red Queen or something like that to understand attraction and flirting. And then for attraction and flirting beyond that, one of the things I would recommend to you is not a book, but watch stand-up comedians. And in particular, watch stand-up comedians that either do crowd work, where they're interacting with the crowd and kind of shit testing back and forth, or dealing with heckles, or doing roasts. Stand-up comedians doing crowd work and roasts are one of the best examples of how to give shit and take shit and flirt in a high-value way. That's not a book, but that's a resource that I would really, really, really recommend for you guys. Okay, this is an interesting one. Sometimes, this is actually funny because it leads to a story too. It says, sometimes I pull the girl and the girls say thank you. And that's actually really funny, because that's actually quite an effective frame control tactic from the girl, right? Because you did something that's a positive and negative, and she just misinterpreted. She did a game technique, kind of. She misinterpreted it as a positive and said thank you. And so I'll tell you a story about this. I had a situation on a program I was teaching. This is in Budapest, Hungary years ago. And this is like very hot Swedish girl in the nightclub. And I do a push-pull or a tease or something like that, and she goes, thank you. And I do another one, and she goes, thank you, right? And so eventually I was getting very frustrated because it wasn't having that effect. And so what I did is I pointed out that that's what she was doing. She's like, oh my God, you say thank you to everything you're saying. I could probably say like, I just pooped my pants, and you'd say thank you. She goes, she's like, oh shit, right? And she realized that like I called her out on it, and she realized she fell for it. And so then she laughed at herself, and it kind of broke her frame, and it had that effect of getting through her little like, thank you, I'm so high value defense mechanism for that moment, and kind of got us into more of a real conversation. And then also throughout the conversation, once I started doing the push pull and she said thank you, I'd be like, and then she couldn't use that anymore, and the interaction went very, very well. It actually worked quite well. The point here, I guess, is that you can tease on any unusual thing. And so the thing that the girl's doing here is unusual, right? And so you can actually, the very thing she's doing that's making it difficult, you can tease her on it, and now you've kind of gone meta, and that's an effective way of getting past that particular thing. And this is very particular to the thank you, but this general concept works in a lot of other areas as well. Don't you think it's too early to introduce a relationship premise after the open, even if it's premise in the negative? No, but the degree of relationship premise might matter. So for example, you can say you and I would not get along right off the open. You might not be able to say we shouldn't have the sex tonight right after the open, but you can say I'm breaking up with you pretty soon after the open, right? So there's degrees, right? There's the degree of whether I like you at all. There's a degree of whether we're gonna spend any time together. There's a degree of whether I'm breaking up with you in a ridiculous way. Then there's the degree of whether we're gonna become a serious relationship, whether we're gonna have sex, whether it can go somewhere, whether we're actually compatible emotionally. So there's tiers to it. And so you wouldn't go with that top tier relationship frame right off the open because it wouldn't make sense, and it also could be way too forward. But you can go with a basic relationship frame, like a more trivial relationship frame almost right off the opener, and then you can build deeper frames from there. But it's never, I mean, I don't say never very often, but it's practically never too early to build to bring up a relationship frame, as long as you do it in a calibrated way and in the negative, or in a fun, joking way as opposed to a serious one. What's your view on cold approach day game in 2025? How do you see it different than in the 2000s and 2010s? I think cold approach day game in 2025 is awesome. There's the three eras. We'll say 2000, 2010, 2025. Actually, I'm gonna say like 2013. So 2000, 2013, 2025. So we'll break it into like halves almost. 2000, cold approach was awesome, but there wasn't a lot of information about it. Most people were, even the guys who studied it and tried to do it the best they could, were not the greatest at it. But also girls were just not getting cold approached. And even being approached was like special and unusual, and there was a lot of just kind of adrenaline and positive chemicals in the body from a cold approach that made it very special and made it very fun. Even though my cold approach back then, because I was just getting started, wasn't very good, just by going up and talking and being friendly and flirting even once, girls would giggle and get attracted to those, would get phone numbers and get dates from it. So the actual cold approach was very, very easy. The skill level that I had and that most people had was very, very low, but it was a time when it was possible to get a lot of results. Around the 2010, 2013, the skill level had increased dramatically, but cold approach had become much more mainstream. There was the book The Game that had come out, and people were familiar with that. Cold approach was just being done a lot more by people. I mean, there were parks in New York City where girls expected to be cold approached if they walked through the park. There was a lot more defense up against it, but at the same time, it's like kind of like two competing technologies, right? The attacking and defending technologies were on par with each other. And so it was still very possible to get results, but it was a little harder for guys to learn, I think, because there was more pushback against it, and girls were more like, are you doing a cold approach, that kind of stuff. A key there actually was to learn to do cold approaches in ways that didn't seem like cold approach, that didn't to be a little more indirect, worked very well, be more genuine throughout the conversation, make it just seem like a normal conversation and not like I'm hitting on you conversation was very, very useful. Yeah, building connection and comfort was huge. False time constraints, even though they're a cold approach technique, were absolutely huge because they made it seem like, less of a big deal. And it's not one that people were familiar with, so nobody saw that as a cold approach technique, and it's very, very useful. Cold approach, again, if you're good at it, still awesome, but it was a little bit harder. Definitely in the 2000s and 2010s, the nightclubs were a little more conducive to cold approach than a lot of them are now. There's a lot more bottle service nowadays, so that was nice in the nightclubs that there was less of that kind of stuff. So those were the positives there. 2025 is funny because I think we've come in some ways full circle. The technique is still out there and guys are good at it, although fewer guys are good at it. I think fewer guys are good at cold approach in 2025 than were in the 2010s and the 20-teens, but a lot of guys still are, and the information to get good is definitely out there, my channel. But at the same time, a lot more people are dating online. A lot fewer guys have done cold approach. I think during COVID, a lot of guys that were kind of sort of doing cold approach dropped off and stopped doing it. And so it's a lot less common, and girls are getting that a lot less often. And a lot more guys are getting some amount of success from online, and so they don't feel the need to submit themselves to the potential rejections and stuff from cold approach. And so now I think, in a weird way, doing day game cold approach in particular, it's kind of a golden era for day game cold approach. The clubs are a little tougher because of the structure of the clubs, the way the entry and bottle service and the loudness and cloisteredness and non-mingliness of some of the high-end clubs makes it harder nowadays for night game than it has been in the past. Although it's still very doable in a lot of places. If you find the right venues, night game's still awesome. Day game in particular, I think, is absolutely great and absolutely blown up. There are still a few places that are overgamed, but it's very, very rare. It's hard to even think of very many. So yeah, the receptivity is back up to a good level. The amount of information out there is excellent. And it is at the point where girls now find it special, again, to be cold approached, at least if it's done in the right way.